Thank you so much, Venki. Pleasure to be here. So currently, I'm working with Al Bank. So I'm the IT leader for the data analytics and governance. So it's been 5 years with the bank, but before Al Bank, I worked with companies like Teradata, Oracle, and SAS. So data has been my bread and butter for the last 15 odd years now. I would say live with the first milestone of our data transformation journey as early as November last year. So it's very close to my heart. So the reason I personally believe that it was one of the biggest achievements for us is that various data warehousing projects that I've seen in my life, this was perhaps the fastest ever. So we were able to start the project and end it within a span of 10 months, which is like, if you look at the average timelines for a data transformation or a data warehousing project, for a bank typically of our size, usually it takes around 2 years. So we were able to do it fast and also do it right. So we were able to sort of build a warehouse which was integrated, consolidated, and so on. So how did it help us? So if you look at the challenges we had before a data warehousing project actually started, so we were a bank where essentially we did not have any data strategy. There was no data warehouse at all. So what it actually meant was that business users used to come to IT for different pieces of information, sometimes even similar information for different use cases. Mm-hmm. And we were in a process of extracting the same information again and again for different users, for different use cases, etc. Now, how does it bother? Because obviously it increases the cost of supporting those kind of extraction. And then eventually it leads up to having data islands and similar data sets proliferating across the organization. So which version of data to trust? We never had a single source of truth. So the idea was to sort of make sure that we consolidate all the data extraction that we are doing for the organization in a single place. The other problem was that our staff were spending most of their time in low value data preparation, data handling tasks. So they were like Excels after Excels, team working on trying to reconcile information, trying to make it accurate, trying to prepare it in a manner that we could deliver our reports on time. Preparing enterprise reports used to take a lot of time for us. And not to mention a lot of data inaccuracies and inefficiencies when it comes to preparing reports, etc. So the idea was to address these challenges somehow or the other. So data transformation, when we went live with Data Warehouse, I think one of the best things that we achieved was that we achieved automation and accuracy. So now a report, for example, which used to take us 6 to 7 days to produce, something like, for example, segment reports for our bank, I can now produce it with a click of a button in seconds. So transformation like this is really amazing to see. Now, looking at how does it really help us. So now in the bank, I have a repository of information, which brings in consolidation. So I have data from various different systems of record consolidated. So I've gotten rid of, or eliminated rather, a lot of inefficient redundancies and different kind of workloads which were not needed from the beginning. Other than that, we have historization. Now, how does it help us? So for a bank, if you got history of information, you can look at trend analysis. Mm-hmm. You can use history to produce a lot of predictive models and even think about advanced analytics. And not to mention, obviously, we've reduced a lot of time to analytics with the automation that we have achieved. So we can now use the data warehouse for our financial reporting, for statutory reporting, regulatory reporting. And interestingly, this year we're trying to leverage information and be able to use it for advanced analytics to be able to predict, what kind of customers we should be banking with, what kind of customers are prone to leave us, etc. So it has been a very, very interesting journey for us so far. I think our business users, likes of CFO, CRO, were always mindful that their teams were spending a lot of inefficient time in preparing information, and the time it used to take them to produce reports for the regulators, for senior management, for the board, etc. And access to information was an inefficient process in the organization, so the pain was always there. The idea was to do it right. And I think that's where we were very lucky as a bank that we had support to do this data transformation right from the board to our senior management. Everybody appreciated that we need to be ready with our infrastructure for data. And the way we actually looked at it was that as part of our ID strategy, we were mindful that we need to have a solid data foundation first. Otherwise, we cannot enter the era of digital transformation. Data for us essentially fuels in the digital transformation. So without intelligence, you can have the best of the breed platforms or channels, but if you don't have the insight about your customers, you can never transform yourself to bring in more value for the customers. So luckily our management was mindful for it, and they were happy to put in whatever investment dollars it took for us to build that platform. I think what really one needs to understand is that they perhaps have not been able to appreciate the value investments in data eventually brings to an organization. So if you look at first generation of data warehouses, for example, they were driven by efficiency because banks or even other organizations for that matter, they used to keep information in big mainframes or disparate applications, and for them to produce use cases which needed information enterprise wide, they used to spend a lot of time in extracting information and then consolidating it and making sure that it's accurate. So that's how data warehouses were initially designed, to integrate information and to bring in efficiencies. But I think as and when organizations started using data and data warehouses, they started realizing that insights about customers actually help them design and define better services and products. So if I know my customers well, I can actually design what I should actually be selling to them, or in terms of services, what kind of services I should be really offering, right? So think about digital transformation, for example. Your digital transformation is incomplete if you haven't really thought about what value you're going to bring to your customers, right? And to define that value and to design it right, you need to have information about what kind of customers you deal with, what are their key pain point areas, what is it that they really like to buy from you, right? And what is the segment that you would want to play your game? So your go-to-market strategy, you cannot define it well if you do not have insights as inputs to your entire strategy. So the value of data is humongous. And I think if organizations are not appreciating it now, they should start realizing it, that data essentially fuels your thought process when it comes to defining and designing what your digital transformation is going to eventually offer. So I think if I were to look at banks, say for example in last 10 years, a lot of investments have been driven by obviously the global financial crisis. So there have been a lot of investments in RegTech. Okay, banks and RegTech essentially all about bringing efficiency in the way that you comply with a regulator or a regulation, for example. So before financial crisis, banks were not mindful of who they're lending to and perhaps what kind of exposures they have in riskier assets. With the global financial crisis, there was perhaps an increased, I would say, acumen around how they should be managing their portfolios and why they should be investing in technology that makes it easier for them to understand their assets and as well as their obligors. The idea was to eventually make sure that not only that you comply, but you have better understanding of kind of customers that you're lending to. You're in a better position to sort of predict if you're exposed to certain kind of risks, right? And it was perhaps investments in the area where CFOs and CROs could sort of collaborate much closer, and perhaps it was very, very evident that they need to start now working as a team. So there were investments around how we can bring risk and finance together. So last 10 years, a lot of investments and investment dollars have gone into risk tech technologies. But then there were other avenues as well. So banks last 10 years have also seen a lot of fraud cases, right? So there have been a lot of investment in artificial intelligence and using machine learnings and the likes to sort of predict fraudulent patterns and what are the kind of customers who are, who are bad customers, who could potentially be fraudsters for the banks. So investments into, to be able to predict behavior, to be able to predict network linkages between different bad kind of customers have also been there. There have obviously been investments on the digital channel side of things. So every bank would want to enhance the user experience or maybe uplift the user experience for their channels, be it corporate website, be it internet banking. So there have been a lot of investment in that particular channel experience space as well. But then last 2 years, we've seen a lot of investments in the mobile application. So, 2 years before, your channel uplift was about omni-channel, so you would want to have similar kind of experience across all channels. But then mobile wave came in, and then it was all about, let's make sure that our mobile application is best of the breed. So, that's where banks essentially have been investing to gain profits, operational efficiency or process efficiency. What I would really want to see is that, investments whereby banks can actually leverage technology to bring in competitive differentiation between one another. I think this is where banks have been trying to sort of achieve, but have not been able to achieve as much as they should have. Well, I'm a firm believer that technology is an applied science. But I think what technology now is doing different is that it's enabling creative people and creative artists by giving them tools so they can think out loud, create something from scratch, which can essentially bring in a better user experience or even a process efficiency or cost reduction. So now technology is essentially enabling artists or creative people to sort of do things differently, think aloud. It's enabling artists is what I'd say. I think I'll start with the later part of the question. Your attitude towards work and is extremely important. So in all various initiatives that I've been a part of, I think one thing which has been really common is the make it happen attitude, right? So when you're trying to do something, you need to strive to be excellent. You need to be a perfectionist. You need to bring in passion in whatever you're trying to deliver. And if it's not there, my recommendation is go do something else. Because it's really your passion and the attitude to make it happen which eventually lets you see the success. And when you have that attitude, then sky is the limit. I mean, then there's no one who could stop you from achieving, right? So I think attitude is very, very important if you really want to see success in your life, especially in technology projects. Now, one of the success stories would be that, we did one of the first and one of the early data warehouse projects that I did in my life was for a bank called Union Bank. It was later on acquired by Standard Chartered, but that was the first data warehouse I did for a bank. And those days, Venki, data warehousing was a very, very new concept. So for bankers to understand what's the real value of a data warehouse, even textbooks won't tell you how you could essentially use a data warehouse. So interestingly, when we went live with that warehouse implementation, we had a chance to present some of the reports to the senior management and the chairman and so on and so forth. So chairman in that meeting, interestingly, started asking us, can we do ad hoc analysis using data warehouse on the fly? And we said yes. So guys, can you then show me some of the transactions that are happening in various branches that I have? So interestingly, we brought in transaction, then we brought in the branch dimension, and we started showing him, Mr. Chairman, these are the different kind of transactions that are happening in all your branches. Then he said, can you please show me different kind of cash withdrawals, let's say less than 5,000 PKR. And then we put that filter and we immediately showed them that these are the customers who are doing those many transactions in your branches with less than a certain amount of value. You know what he did immediately? He looked at the head of retail banking and he said, can you please go talk to these customers and educate them that they can actually go to an ATM instead of wasting my teller's time on the branch. So it was such an eye-opener, not only for those bankers, but even for us, because we could see value immediately out of data. Something that we had worked hard so much to build, and we could see value coming out of information on the fly. So I think that was a great success to witness in that particular meeting. Awesome. So the idea is then, information, like I said, can bring in a lot of virtues. If you're a banker, or you could be in any organization, if you want to understand your customer, you need data. You need to see what kind of transactions he's doing with you. When he walks into your branch or channel, what is his most favorite thing to do, right? What are the kind of services he wants you to deliver? And if you do not understand your customer or his behavior or his transactional interaction with you, there is no way in the world you can succeed in your digital transformation. You can perhaps revamp your channel experience, but to me, that's not digital transformation. Digital transformation essentially is when your technology starts bringing in more value for your customers. And then, that's where you start transforming really the organization the way it used to be. Look, failure, interestingly, one of the takeaways that I would want the youngsters to take away from this conversation, your attitude towards failure really counts a lot. So every failure for me has been a learning experience. If you're in a technology career, you're bound to fail. There aren't many projects that you would come across which would always be a success. But how you react to that failure and how you learn from those experiences is essentially what really matters. Some of the key learnings that I've taken away from various failures in the technology projects that I've been a part of is that, for example, and I'll use examples. So last year we were trying to uplift our customer experience on our mobile application. That couldn't really work out the way we really wanted it. But my takeaway was that when you're trying to implement a mission critical technology, you need to depend on a product and a vendor who is there and is available to provide support in your geography, right? If you're a bank or an organization of a size that you cannot invest in those kind of skill set, then you're better off being closer to your partner. All right. Otherwise, bring skill set on board and sort of invest in those kind of competencies. So that's one. Secondly, if you're trying to work with a partner, make sure that he's done something similar with at least one or two other banks, better if in your region. Because if you're not a huge organization, chances are that your appetite of taking risks could be limited. So you don't want to try and take chances of doing something first time ever, okay? Because usually what happens is that you do not have the depth of skills and knowledge of doing it right. And if you're working with a partner, and if your partner is somebody who's done it before, then it always helps you, learn what could potentially go bad, and also make sure that it goes live as a success. So, few questions that you should be asking yourself when you're making a technology decision is to see how often the same technology has been delivered for your peers. So I think that was one of the major learning takeaways for me from my failures. For me, frankly, a very interesting question, actually. So, see, work for me has to be a constant learning experience. So the day when I believe that my job or anything that I'm doing for that matter has stopped providing me with the learning opportunity, right? That's where I would want to sort of quit and move on to do something which provides me better learning avenues. So I wouldn't want to, and I would never recommend anybody to be doing kind of work that doesn't give an opportunity to learn. You could be passionate about doing something, but then there has to be some learning. Attitude. So I can always, make sure that I invest in training. I can get him the best kind of skills that I want to see in that guy. But attitude is something that I go for in the first go. So for me, if somebody has to come and join me or my team or my organization, he has to be a go-getter. He has to make things happen. He has to be passionate about what he does. And if there is any shortcoming in terms of competency or skill, I can always make sure that we, sort of augment with different kind of trainings and sort of fill that gap. But it's the attitude that I look for. I love them all. I mean, hard to take one name really. So when I was in my teenage, and I was before joining my engineering college, really, I mean, that's where I started working on Java and Oracle databases. I mean, not to mention Oracle certification was upcoming those days. So, those were my early days with databases and applications. This is where I started working with Java. When I joined engineering college, I got introduced to MFC and C++ and what Microsoft technologies had to offer at that time. So for good 2-3 years, I was working on Microsoft technologies. Towards the end of my graduation, I got hooked on to C# and .NET, and then for good 1 or 2 years, I kept working on C#. Interestingly, I joined Teradata much earlier in my career. So again, Teradata was something that I fell in love with, and I was a Teradata certified master myself. So obviously, I liked working on Teradata on the database side of things. But then eventually I worked a lot on SAS. So when you talk about application programming or even data management kind of routines, SAS had one of the most beautiful statistical library one could imagine. So, so to be honest, Venki, it really depends on the kind of business problem you're trying to solve. Your business problem literally drives what technology is the right technology to use. So if I were to build an application for my customers or B2C kind of an application, obviously then I'll have to go to web-based technology stack and choose the right one. If I have to solve a problem whereby perhaps my organization wants to solve some decision management kind of problems, then I'll have to see what kind of databases are fit for the purpose. So the business problem really drives what kind of technology is the right one to use for that particular problem. Interestingly, if I look at my initiatives recently, so year before the last, we were tasked by central bank to be compliant with IFRS 9, one of the regulations that has recently come for banks. So IFRS 9 essentially means that you have to start producing forward-looking PD models, LGD models, and you would want to predict probabilities of default for your customers from various different portfolios. Now what that essentially means is that you need to have historic information in your database which can sort of help you to create those models from scratch and to do it right. Our challenge was that we had gaps in various historic snapshots of information. Now, if you don't have historic data, you can create a model, but you cannot really rely on it, right? So the idea was our team said that we're not going to transform or recreate information which is hypothetical, rather we would want to create the actual information. So interestingly, our analysts, they started working on our system of record, and from different change logs, they were able to recreate a history of our information for which we did not have the snapshots. So to decipher the logic of how we could create historic data from our history tables and change logs, etc., was kind of a eureka moment for not only myself but for the entire team, because now we could see light at the end of the tunnel. So we were able to reproduce history for all those portfolios, and then we were able to do the models as well. So that for us was kind of a eureka moment, because we were able to solve a problem which perhaps was almost insolvable. To be honest, you cannot do much with information if you haven't really been able to discipline yourself when it comes to data management. So organizations who are not disciplined in terms of making sure that their access to data is taken care of, there is no way in the world that they could make use of that information for better insights for digital transformation. So my recommendation to organizations would be to make sure that they bring in efficiency in the way they collaborate and consolidate information, and then that information consolidated once can then be a source of a lot of insight for them as they move forward in their digital journeys. Pleasure was mine, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much.